What's up, folks? It's Dr. Romulo and I'm coming at you once again from the X-Layer to provide you my thoughts on the latest Stephen King adaptation, and fortunately, a successful one. And that is, of course, It. It came out last night. Got a chance to watch it. Went to the first screening. I wanted to make sure that I got to experience it as soon as it came out because I've been tracking this thing for a while. I guess I should start from the beginning. My relationship with it. Well, my relationship with Stephen King goes back to like when I was like 12 or something. I remember going to a garage sale and like they had The Dead Zone and I think it was Skeleton Crew, which is like an anthology book, a series of short stories. Bought a couple of those, read them, scared, made me want more, got more. I think the recent book that had been released at that time was The Dark Half. So I read that one. Fucking love The Dark Half. I think that was my favorite book at the time. And then I joined the Stephen King book club, which was like back in the day when everything was over the mail and there was nothing digital and you can only get things in the library or buy the books yourselves. They would have these things where you could like become part of the club and they'll send you one of whatever every month. Like they had Columbia House and all these other things for music and movies. And they had a Stephen King book club. So I joined that and they started sending me hardcovers of all the books. So I fucking read them all. It was, I think, one of the first ones that I read. And it's a super long book. I read it like in 7th grade. I remember there was a winter break assignment to like read a book and like write a journal about it. This 7th grade, mind you. So I was reading it and I was like journaling my sort of summary of the book as I was reading it. I forget what the teacher thought about it. I'm sure she thought that maybe it was inappropriate for me to be reading that book or whatever. Who cares? She never said anything. She just kind of checked me off for the assignment. But I remember really being into the book, kind of just really identifying with like the kids, because I was a kid, and like the whole thing, it was all about like these kids taking on this horrible entity and then dealing with it as adults and kind of seeing that residual effect wave of implications from the past to the present kind of play themselves out both in the present and in the past. It's just a really great book. And then of course ABC announced they were doing their miniseries. This is the time when ABC was doing miniseries. And they did they did The Stand, they did the Tommyknockers, they did a remake of The Shining, which wasn't terrible. It was actually pretty decent. I forget what else they did. But anyway, the It miniseries, it was great. I really enjoyed it at the time. Of course, Tim Curry's portrayal of Pennywise is like legendary, and that always kind of was a big hurdle for this new film, right? Like, how do you get somebody to play Pennywise and trump the performance of Tim Curry, right? So that was a huge hurdle for it. That series itself, like the miniseries, was cool, but like the ending was a little bit cheesy. Obviously, it didn't have the edge that the book had because it was a television miniseries, so they couldn't cuss, and a lot of the implied and even explicit as sort of sexual elements weren't in there, which was, I think, important to kind of amplifying like the kind of eerie quality of the whole story. Because here you have these kids, right? They're children, and generally when you think about children, like you just think about, okay, innocence, them growing up, and like you don't think about like children at that time dealing with like like their sexual feelings and like how that might play out amongst each other at that age, on top of children having to face like horrible threats to their lives, the existential threat of children constantly going missing around them, and how that may be their own fate. One of the children dealing with the loss of his brother. I forgot all the names, folks. It's been a long time since I read the book, but I started to remember some of them, like Beep Beep Richie. So Richie was one of them. Ben was the African American kid, I believe. And then I don't know. I'm not going to try to remember the names, but anyway, that was the thing about the book. It was like the mixture of all these things, like, kind of really gave you like an interesting experience that the miniseries didn't quite capture, but still kind of had its own sort of life and enough of an artistic effect that it has kind of survived the ages in the sense that people have watched it as the new generations have come, and everybody's kind of aware of like Tim Curry's performance, and whenever they think of like a clown as like a kind of a horror centric threat, like a boogeyman type of figure that manifests as a clown, they always think about Pennywise and they always think about Tim Curry. All of a sudden, a few years ago, you start hearing, okay, they're gonna make a new It, and they're gonna break it up into 2 films. So essentially, the miniseries was a 2-part miniseries. When the kids were young and then when they were older. So it made sense. Okay, they're gonna do the same thing, but they're gonna do it in feature film format, which is going to allow for a lot better sort of artistic representation of the story, better quality actors, even though the actors were good. The children were all right, but I remember the older actors were really good. You had John Ritter, you had Annette O'Toole, I believe. You had some other folks in there that brought a lot to the characters and definitely made it just like a kind of like a valid telling of the story, a valid dramatic telling, to the point where, like, general audiences were able to appreciate it. But like when you hear that a studio is planning on doing like, a big, relatively big budget version of this story, like, you get excited, especially if you're a fan of the book, and definitely if you're a fan of the series as well. I happen to be a fan of both. So I was tracking this, things were going well. I think his name is Fukuyama. I forget his first name. Anyway, he directed the first season of Detective, True Detective on HBO. I didn't watch it as it aired, but then I binged it after I heard all the hoopla about it, and it was fantastic. Like, his directing was so spot on in terms of like just establishing like like a visual and also kind of the world that existed for True Detective, like through the cinematography and like the shots and everything, like really like brought a lot of weight to the story, made it something special, more than just a television series. Like that show, that first season, beyond like the acting, of course, Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey did a great job in that show, and definitely are key figures on why that first season was so successful. But Rick Fukuyama, I think his name is, his directing, like everything he did to put that thing together, because he directed every episode, was masterful. And like and so I knew that if he was going to be doing it, that we were going to get something really fucking special. Fast forward a little while later, apparently he'd been working on it for a while, and then he leaves the fucking project. And then you start to get worried, because when you hear that like really talented people are leaving projects, then that tells you that the studio is having a heavy-handed approach to kind of guiding the project, which means that you're likely not going to get something good. Like, you're likely not going to get something good. Anyway, time went by, and then all of a sudden you hear that this guy, the director of the actual film, Moochie, I think is his last name. He directed a movie called Mama, which I didn't see, but I know it's a good horror film. It's like Jessica Chastain is in it, and I believe it was produced by Guillermo del Toro. Anyway, like there was a lot of kind of solid artistic pedigree to that film, and apparently this guy did a good job. Andy Muschietti, I think is his name, and so they gave him It. So then he's in there, right? And it's looking like, you know, maybe it could go good, maybe not. Like it all has to do with, like, again, like how much influence the studio is going to try to have on the final product. Are they going to allow the director to do a good job? So now, fast forward to a few months ago, we start seeing promotional material for this. People online start mocking it. It started to seem like maybe like what was at the heart of the issues that led to Rick Fukushima. I think that's his name. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong. That led to him leaving was that the studio was just wanted a watered down version of Pennywise. Like, they didn't want to go all in on it. And that's what the marketing started to kind of support that idea, right? That maybe that was what was at the heart of that problem, which means that we're going to get a really kind of watered down version of Pennywise. He's not going to in any way like live up to at least what Tim Curry did, and the film itself may wind up being crap. Like, for instance, case in point, The Dark Tower. You know, like, we heard about Dark Tower in development forever. There was a time period where it had become very clear, oh, Ron Howard's going to direct it, and there's going to be a television series, and HBO's in, or somebody was in, and everything sounded great, and you were just like, yes, they're finally going to do The Dark Tower right. And then years went by, nothing was heard, and then all of a sudden we got this film that came out a few months ago, and it was horrible, an hour and a half. It's just atrocious, man. Just terrible. Terrible. I'm a huge Dark Tower fan, and that was just a horrible movie. So that could potentially have been what this was, It. And fortunately, it is not. So I watched the movie last night, and I'm going to be very honest and say that this is a fucking great adaptation of It. I highly recommend that you watch it. It's so well put together. Just the structure, the pacing, the visual design, the acting. So much of it was really good. One of the things I really liked the most was like the representation of Pennywise. He didn't have as much of a character to him as Tim Curry brought, because really in the Tim Curry version, like it was a lot of the success of that series was dependent on his portrayal, because they didn't have the budget, they didn't have like the special effects tools that we have now, and they didn't have this director, Andy Muschietti, who is very clearly a fan of like 80s horror films. And I'm going to say that, like, in part, this movie is a love letter to the Nightmare on Elm Street series. There's a point where we see a poster of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 in a movie theater. He uses posters for movies as like kind of temporal markers, like kind of telling you that time is passing by. And one of those was the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 poster. Generally, what I've noticed is, like, in the pantheon of Nightmare on Elm Street films, like, it ranks pretty low amongst fans. But I remember being a kid, like, Part 3 had come out, and that's the first one I saw. And it freaked me the fuck out. Then I went back and watched 1 and 2, and then I saw 4 in the theater like 4 or 5 times. And then immediately after, the next year, they released The Dream Child, which was 5. And that poster is like probably my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street poster. It's such a beautiful design. And the movie itself, like, I mean, you can say whatever you want about it, but like, that was the point where like they really understood what they had and what they were doing and how they should do it. So they were very creative with like the dream sequences and the killings, essentially. And you can see that play out here, because Pennywise, in the way that he approached all the children, was sort of creating like these nightmarish experiences for them, much like they did in Nightmare on Elm Street. Especially in Part 5, where like, because Alice, the main character, the dream master, as it were, from Part 4, she was pregnant, and Freddy was using the child's dreams in her belly to get into the real world and kill people around Alice. So in that particular movie, the reality and the dream world were constantly blending with each other, so you never knew when you were in the dream, when you weren't, and Freddy was able to come out at any time. I kind of just started going after people at various times, whether they were asleep or awake. And so what happened in this movie was very similar to that. Pennywise would just appear all of a sudden to these children, and it wasn't in a dream, and it could have been at any sort of mundane moment, I forget what the overweight kid's name is, but January Embers, My Heart Burns There Too. That's the poem that he wrote to Beverly Marsh. Beverly Marsh is the girl. Anyway, with the sequence in the library when he sees the balloon and then he follows it and then it takes him down and then all of a sudden he's being chased by a headless boy that he'd seen the head of in a photo from Derry is the town. Derry, some historical photos that he was looking at when he was doing kind of his research on the town of Derry and how children have been dying at much higher percentages than the national average, as well as adults. But anyway, that whole sequence, it happened in the middle of just a regular day, and the same thing happened, I think, with Ben, is the name of the African American kid who had his kind of moment, kind of his dream sequence, his nightmare dream sequence, in that meat packing plant or whatever it was. So there were a lot of parallels between the way Pennywise was sort of stalking and preying on these children with what Freddy was doing, and ultimately what Freddy became in part 5. Because in part 4, it had kind of escalated already, this whole approach of let's really focus on making the dreams creative. But it was really in part 5 where it was just full on that, and they had really perfected whether you like the structure of the film and what actually happened in the film is irrelevant if you can appreciate the art of creating those sequences and sort of what was done visually. There were a lot of parallels with this movie, so I really understand why he had that poster there and sort of what he was telling the audience with that. But then there was another scene that really kind of solidified this whole sort of thesis that I guess I'm laying out for you, that the film is a love letter to the Nightmare on Elm Street series. It's a scene where Beverly Marsh is in the bathroom, and that's when she first has her kind of nightmarish, the introduction into this world of being taken into these dark fantasies by Pennywise, when she's in the bathroom, and that hair that she had cut off starts to come out of the drain, and then all of a sudden you see all this blood exploding from the drain. It's just getting everywhere. That was an homage straight up to Johnny Depp's death scene, Glenn, in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, when he gets sucked into the mattress and then all the blood comes out. It's all everywhere. It was pretty much the exact same thing, except obviously in a bathroom, a different character or whatever, but it was totally an homage. And then there was a moment in there also that was kind of an homage to Carrie, because when she was completely covered in blood, there was a moment where it's are we watching Carrie here, or is this, because everything was red, there was blood everywhere, just like when she was full of blood and she was taking down the gymnasium and killing all those folks in the prom. It was very evocative of both of those, both the Johnny Depp Glenn death scene in Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and the Carrie death scene in Carrie. Not her death scene. Well, actually, yeah, it did wind up being her death scene. So anyway, there was a lot of kind of those moments, but regardless of whether or not you can tie specific moments to other films, the approach that he took was very much in that vein. Even when we first saw that scene, I think it was with Ben, the African American kid, when he goes to that meat market, and he's just kind of riding his bike in that alley because he's trying to get away from that bully guy. I used to remember all these names, and it's all gone now. But anyway, when he goes down the alley and he's next to the door for that meat packing plant or whatever, and then the door starts to open, but it's kind of locked, and then you see kind of red around the edge of the door, kind of implying that there's fire behind it, and then hands trying to come out of it. I immediately started thinking like, damn, this is very Nightmare on Elm Street. This is a very Nightmare on Elm Street moment. And then that's sort of like the approach that was taken every time we saw Pennywise, and when all the weird shit that he was causing was happening, was very much in that vein. Like it didn't feel like fake. It felt like they had really taken advantage not only of like the digital effects that they have access to now, but also practical effects. Like a lot of it was really planned. You can tell that a lot of it was done on set, you know, at least parts of it, enough so that it just gave it that more kind of realistic feel and made it feel more authentic, like horror, you know, rather than like your run-of-the-mill, just like cookie cutter, like modern day horror film where they just like try to have like random scares and like occasionally they'll have like some weird thing, but it's like, but it doesn't feel organic, and it doesn't have like that tangibility that kind of draws you in even further and makes the world even more real. That what they call in filmmaking verisimilitude, the appearance of truth. Like it didn't have much of that. Most of the films today don't have much of that, but this film did, in the way that they represent a lot of that stuff. Like that scene where Pennywise is like, he's inside of like a cabinet, like all contorted, and then he comes out, and then he's like kind of, he has to like kind of like reposition his entire body. It just felt like very Nightmare on Elm Street. And anyway, in the representation of Pennywise, is where I think the film has like one of its main strengths. Like he's represented as big. He's represented as a predator, like a real vicious type of predator, with still kind of obviously the ability to kind of seduce children into his web, you know, so that he can like rip off their arms or things of that sort. But like the size is a big thing. My favorite sequence of all was when they were in the garage and they were looking at the projected images from the past, and then all of a sudden he starts to pop up at the images, one frame at a time, and then all of a sudden he comes out of the fucking screen enormous into this dark garage that they're all packed into, and it was so quick, you know, it was so quick. It was like we were seeing the still images, and all of a sudden this huge Pennywise is like coming out three-dimensionally from the screen into the room, and you're just like, ah! You know, like in your mind you're just screaming, and then all of a sudden he's in that room and he's about to attack him, and he's like running, and it's dark, and it was such a great sequence. But like I really love that there were so many great moments like that where Pennywise was represented as like just a legitimate threat, and it felt like threatening, and it felt menacing, and it felt like terrifying, and it was so effective, and I love that. I love that they did that, and like really paid special care to making sure that like he was actually scary, and not just like, oh, he's a scary clown, everybody's gonna be afraid of that. No, man, let's be creative with this. Let's push the boundaries of what we can do. Let's really represent Pennywise in ways that, you know, are unique, interesting to look at, maybe haven't been done before. You know, they really took that approach. You can tell. And so the guy, Andy Muschietti, like, yeah, I have to give it up to him and those people that he chose to be around him, the production designer and special effects folks, like, to collectively, like, they had a very clear, unified vision, and they executed it well. So my hat goes off to them. So they were able to sort of surmount that hurdle of like, of you know, trying to sort of not necessarily top Tim Curry's representation, but like, you know, create something that is of equal value, just completely different, and that's what it wound up being. Anyway, beyond that, all of the children were very good. I don't have any complaints about them whatsoever. Children are a mixed bag, and they're definitely a coin toss. You never know if you're gonna get a good performance or a shitty performance, and they wind up with a pretty great set of kids, you know, kind of like in the Stranger Things cast. And obviously one of the kids is from Stranger Things, so you do have that bit of crossover there. But like, yeah, the kids, yeah, did a really good job, and I really bought everything that they were going through. Cinematography was fantastic. Production design, excellent. Production design was like straight out of like what you imagine in your mind as you were reading it, at least for me. So it felt very organic to the source material. I felt like I was in the book again as I was watching the film, which is like so important for an adaptation, you know, like we all have such great imaginations, and like if you're gonna make a movie about something that we love so much and have imagined so succinctly, like you got to try to reproduce that. Like, you know, that we all kind of had a similar experience reading the book. Like if you're making the movie, you better have that same experience and then try to translate it through the filmic language into something that will be evocative of the material, but also kind of its own thing. And that's what the film wound up being, because a lot of it wasn't in the book, or like, you know, like it is an adaptation that, you know, needed to be what it was for a 2-hour film that told half the story, and it worked for me. Like I wasn't thinking about the book, but it's been a while since I read the book, so really I didn't really have that in mind. But if they had strayed too much from it, it would have been obvious, and I would have known it, you know, and it would have been it would have been a hindrance to the overall quality of the film. That was not the case, fortunately. Yeah, so much about it I really liked. I really liked all this stuff with them kind of representing the 80s and like the New Kids on the Block stuff. There were a lot of moments of like clear-cut, legitimate comedy in the film, and it was a great sort of counterpoint to the horror, you know, like that's a great mix of emotions that you want to evoke in a horror film, like comedy and horror. You want to like have those two emotions, because they're related, but like they're on extreme ends of the spectrum of emotion. So to take us from that point of being completely you know, elated by humor to being completely terrified by horror is such a great like internal process, right? Experience that then defines a really great kind of horror movie experience, and the film had that. Yeah, I'm just really happy with the whole thing. I really do want to see it again. I'm definitely going to own it, and this is what I'm buying, and I look forward to the second one. They just said that they're going to do a second one, which is really great. I heard that last night's numbers were enormous as far as box office goes, so they're going to have a great first weekend, and who knows, like this may wind up luring like some really top-notch folks into those adult roles, which I would really welcome, because I would love that second movie to keep honoring the source material in the same way that it has, but to kind of reach that legendary status of like, you know, one of those films of like the time, you know, that kind of defines the time period. I have a feeling this first one definitely will, but like if you also throw in like, you know, like the big name actors of the time period to kind of solidify its place in history, I think it would be wonderful, and I look forward to that happening, because I have a feeling it will. I have a feeling this second film is going to be a big deal, given how successful the first one's going to be. We all know about this character. Everybody's afraid of Pennywise in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I don't believe in any of this stuff. I don't believe in ghosts or anything. Like I don't believe any supernatural crap, whatsoever. But you know, I do allow myself like to have that willing suspension of disbelief when I go into films that I know are going to be good, and so I do wind up kind of feeling those moments of terror, and they're so valid in this film that even though most people that do believe in ghosts and monsters and all this shit, even though they try to stay away from those feelings, there is a bit of an addiction to it, right? Everybody kind of has that curiosity, and it's certainly a safe place to experience it in the movie theater. So I have a feeling a lot of families are going to go watch this, and it's going to go really fucking well. Anyway, so that's my reaction, thoughts, review, whatever you want to call it. It's just a video, me talking about the movie I saw last night, which I really enjoyed. Hope you enjoyed watching it. Hope you enjoyed watching the film. If you haven't already done so, you can subscribe to my channel down here. And as always, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't already, you better put an X in that box, ladies and gentlemen, because ain't nobody checking me, folks. Ain't nobody checking me. Bye-bye.